So let me start with my official formal greeting. Good morning to our friends in the North and South Americas. Good afternoon to our friends in the UK and in Europe. Good early evening to our friends in Dubai and India. Good evening to our friends in Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. Good late evening to our friends in Australia. Nice to see your faces again. It's been a couple of months. Glad to see you're all still with us. Still have our opportunity to practice and learn together. JC, we have some questions.
Dear Ajahn, did the Lord Buddha go further than reaching the jhanas attained through the existing samatha practice at the time? Question 2. Is this going further technique called Vipassana? Question 3. Can we then say that the Lord Buddha reached Nibanna through Vipassana? Question 4. If the answer are yes to the 3 questions above, could you please teach Vipassana regularly? Question 5. If the answer is no to the above, could you please explain how and teach how the Lord Buddha reached Nibbana? Thank you.
So, according to the description in the biography of Lord Buddha, the Bodhisattva did train with the greatest samatha masters of his time. And it's described that he studied the 5th and 6th jhanas with one of those masters, and the 7th and 8th jhanas with another of those masters. The first 4 jhanas aren't even mentioned, curiously, which suggests that the Bodhisattva already had some significant abilities. So his starting place was the Arupa jhanas in that lifetime, obviously, with many lives beforehand of preparation, practice, familiarization. And he did observe that. So these are extremely profound meditations, and I only know, in Thailand, I know of only one person who has more than the 4th jhana. So the current generation of Arahants have, the ones that I'm aware of, have up to the 4th jhana. And I personally suspect that Luang Por Chah did have more than that. He had quite remarkable abilities. And so the infinite base of space, the infinite base of consciousness, the infinite base of nothingness, the infinite base of neither perception nor non-perception. Incredibly profound and subtle and vast concentration. For the ordinary practitioner, if we experienced something like that, we would probably think that we were enlightened, because they're so profoundly peaceful and vast and boundless. Because the Bodhisattva had extremely powerful spiritual powers, spiritual faculties, his mindfulness, clear comprehension was very well established. He noticed that these jhanic states degenerated. And so he could absorb into one of these most profound meditations, but he noticed that after a time, the mind would return to a more normal state. And of course, anybody as adept as that could just go back into the jhana again, and then they would think that normally that kind of samadhi can be quite deluding, because the mind becomes so radiant and so peaceful. And there won't be many kilesas that one can observe, because that kind of samadhi suppresses lust and suppresses irritation and aversion. It's so wholesome. It is very wholesome. But of course, there's still a vanity self-identification, and the practitioners can start to identify with the radiance, with the peacefulness. And it can be a bit dangerous because that there is something to base the vanity on, because there really is a lot of radiance and there really is a lot of peacefulness and it really is impressive. But the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, in his remarkable, with his remarkable faculties, noticed that this is also subject to death, because each jhanic state has its individual birth, staying for some time in cessation. And I am looking for the deathless. Because there is a conditioned, I have faith that there is an unconditioned. That's what I'm searching for. So after that, he went off on his own, practiced the extreme of austerities. By that meaning, he would only eat a half a palm of rice a day, and he didn't allow himself to absorb into any of the jhanas. And from the way I understand it, I think he's doing the Suttas practice, so he's just sitting all day. And the racking pain associated with sitting and the hunger pains, and he said of that time, I think it lasted for 7 years, he said of that time that it's possible that another great spiritual practitioner experienced as much difficulty and suffering in trying to find spiritual release as he had. But it is not possible that anybody suffered more. This is worth recollecting sometimes when we recollect the qualities of a Buddha. Not to feel guilty, not to feel like, oh, you know, the Buddha went through all this effort and beat yourself up, feeling not worthy. The point is, actually, he did this for us, because it was millions of lives ago that he could have become an arahant under the previous Buddha. And he decided to cause a multitude to cross over, was the phrase that is used when he observed Dipankara Buddha, who had caused a multitude to cross over as Sumedha, the great yogi. He wondered, why don't I also cause a multitude to cross over? And so in his incredible practice of the patient endurance, he then had the insight, this isn't working. After 7 years, this isn't a way to release the mind. And the insight was, perhaps I should combine some concentration with contemplation, directed, focused thought. That may be the middle way. And of course, it was the middle way. So that's how he describes his own progression of understanding of how to practice. But we can't really take the Buddha's example as our roadmap, because from there, it describes that he recollected 50 lives, 500 lives, 5,000 lives. So obviously, we don't have the kind of spiritual faculties to be able to do that. And with his remarkable abilities, what he saw was the arising, staying for some time and ceasing. And he saw that in those hundreds of lives, each of them different, that there was no abiding permanent self. The whole thing was constantly changing. This arises because of that previous condition, there is this condition. Because of those previous actions, there is these states, these experiences. He had the insight of, it's presented in several ways, but one of the main ways is seeing that arising and ceasing, the impermanence, obviously, and the lack of an abiding permanent self anywhere. There was an insight into not self, and also the suffering of it. Each of those lives, association with the dislike, separation from the light. Whatever pleasure arose also ceased, separation from the pleasant state. So that's how his enlightenment is described. But it's an intelligent question, and it's also not an intelligent question. It's fair enough for a person to want to know what is a method that I can work with, that I can feel confident is going to help me to be liberated. It's an intelligent question. But where it's not an intelligent question, is it's not methods that liberate us. So it's the qualities that you develop through practicing with methods. That's what liberates the mind. And this is where it gets tricky. So different people have different character types, and people have to experiment a little bit. But when people ask Ajahn, what is the correct method for my character type, he usually says breath meditation as being what's appropriate for everybody. And when Luang Por Chah taught meditation, he wouldn't teach samatha or vipassana. He said it's like when you pick up a stick, it has two ends. One end is samatha, one end is vipassana. What Ajahn Chah did teach was to practice a lot, and to practice when you want to, when you don't want to, when you're inspired, when you're uninspired, when there's laziness, when there's diligence. And what happens when you do this, when you have this commitment to a regular daily practice and you do it consistently, you are going to develop calm and insight. You're going to develop insight into mind states because you practice with all of them. And so what happens is when you're trying to be aware of the breath and there is hindrances or agitation, you're trying to be aware of the breath, but you become aware of the content of the thoughts of the mind. And as you continue to try to be aware of the breath and pull back from the thoughts, you become aware whether it's wholesome or unwholesome or neutral. And you become more adept at this. And sometimes the mind becomes peaceful. If it becomes peaceful, well, then that session was samatha. And sometimes the mind doesn't become peaceful, but you might develop some understanding about what's affecting your mind and develop some equanimity or some wisdom. So Luang Por Chah wouldn't separate them. So, and essentially how my teachers or how Ajahn has taught me is like, when you come to the sitting cushion, you're trying to make the mind peaceful. It's a wholesome thing to aspire for. So I guess that's an aspiration for samatha. And it's basically understood that you need some stability of mind, some samatha in order to develop real insight. There needs to be some calm. So calm is fine. We're intending on being a little bit calm. But what often happens is there's hindrances. So there might be irritation or aversion or disappointment. And oftentimes we have to apply a reflective method to bring the mind to balance. So it's like when you sit, take a kind of a scan of how the mind is. You're trying to be with the breath, but there's irritation or aversion, hurt, anger, whatever. And then you realize, okay, I actually need to do metta. I need to do metta for 10 minutes. I need to pacify the irritation or the aversion. I need to practice some forgiveness. So you pick up a samatha practice to bring the mind to a state of balance. Then maybe after that 10 minutes, the mind's willing to be with the breath. Then you're mindful of the breathing. And then when the mind moves from its peaceful state, that's the time that Ajahn says to do some actual investigation. So Vipassana isn't a method. Vipassana means insight. And insight is seeing anicca, impermanence, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, anatta, not self, on a deeper level, like on a very direct and deep level where ignorance is being weakened and seeing according to the truth is being fortified. So there are some places that say, the Goenkaji, SN Goenka centers that have Vipassana retreats. They're teaching a method that they're calling Vipassana. But a method is a method. And it's the consistency of the mindfulness that you cultivate with whatever meditation object that you're using. Mindfulness has the function of seeing things as they are. So the more you meditate skillfully with any number of objects, as the mindfulness gets better and the concentration develops, that's when insight will occur. When path factors working together weaken the ignorance. So it's usually a combination of mindfulness, clear comprehension, concentration, and wisdom function in the mind. The eightfold path, Ajahn describes the Dharma wheel as being something that turns in the mind. Right mindfulness, right concentration, right thought, they're occurring in the mind. The list is a description of it, but essentially it's qualities. And so the most effective way to develop insight, and that's what I stress in my approach, is to meditate a lot. Because if we meditate a lot, there is, in general, there's going to be a growth in some samatha and a growth in mindfulness, a growth in wisdom, understanding our minds, our bodies. We do some investigation as well. In the forest tradition, we're encouraged to contemplate death and impermanence, and contemplate the parts of the body, contemplate the body as elements. And so when we're able to do that, insight will occur. But in my own experience of my practice, when insight has occurred, on the day that it occurred or the day before it occurred, I didn't know it was going to. It's not like I sat down and I said, I'm going to do Vipassana and I'm going to have an insight. It was always the case that I was doing at least 7 hours of meditation a day for a period of about at least a week. And then, through the sheer consistency of effort, some deeper level of insight into either impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, or not self occurred. But for myself, it has usually been directly associated with how much I was practicing and how consistently I was practicing. So at least that's how I understand it. But that was helpful. And if we're not yet in a position where we can do 7 or 8 hours of meditation per week, then it's okay. When we're laying a foundation, when however much practice we do, those experiences of insight are coming closer. So no effort is a waste. All of it is working towards ripening when those insights occur. But it is good to try to gently and steadily increase consistently. So if you've been doing 1 session a day, try to increase it to 2. If you see the benefits of 2 sessions a day, if it's possible, increase it to 3. And then take periods of time for retreat. So that's a large part of the reason I went to Bulgaria. I was involved in a 2 months of building project, and I knew it was going to be going on for 4 more months. So I took a 6-week break in between, and I was meditating for 7.5 hours a day. And it was very nice. Wonderful to have a break and put the monastery down and meditate a lot. And the qualities of mindfulness and concentration improve. And then the insight, seeing things more clearly according to their true characteristics, also occurs. So most people have what they call Vipassana insights. Most people experience these in intensive retreats. That's just the way it is. It takes a consistent effort to get the spiritual powers powerful enough to penetrate through the layers of ignorance. Sorry.
Thank you, Prajan. Then question 2. Dear Ajahn, how does karma work in different bodies when one person passes on and takes rebirth into another body? Is it fair?
So it's an interesting contemplation. There's an assumption, it seems that there's an assumption in this question that it's a different mind. And it's tricky, isn't it? Because on one level, ultimate truth is not self. But the Buddha never said that there isn't a mind. But the mind is taking on, due to karma, different attributes. So what happens is when the body dies, this body and all of the karma that Ajahn made this lifetime, this body dies. This mental continuum goes to a next life. Mind goes to the next life. So it's the same mental continuum that made that previous karma that is going to receive the results of that karma good and bad, and neutral. So is it fair? Yeah. It's fair in as much as, conventionally speaking, your past lives made that karma. So there is a direct line of connection to all of those previous lives. It is one mental continuum. The reason we don't describe it as a soul or as a self or as an ultimate self is because it is always changing. The bodies that we get affect the mind. Then what we do when we have those bodies affects the body and the mind, and there's a lot of overlap, and so it's always changing. It's when the Buddha was having his insight, when he recollected 5,000 past lives, that's what he noticed, was just how much it changes life to life, how thoroughly impermanent and changing it is. I suppose the part that you could say isn't fair is that we don't know, that we're ignorant and deluded. So that's kind of not fair. It would be great if when we were born, it came with an instruction manual. This is good karma, this is bad karma. When you do this, this will happen. When you do that, that won't. It would be good if that happened. And it would also be really good if we could actually see the past lives. I mean, that would make it much easier, wouldn't it? If you could actually review, oh, that was really a mistake, not going to do that again. Or, oh, wow, that was really skillful. Look at the great results that brought. Going to do more of that. If we could see that, obviously life would be easier. Our choices in life would be so much easier. Sometimes we want to do something that's a bit naughty because we're going to get some pleasure. And it's like, I remember one student once wrote to me, I've fallen in love. I want to have an affair with a married man. What should I do, Ajahn? Well, what do you think the Ajahn is going to say? It's like, go for it. Why not? You only live once. I'm like, I don't recommend this because you don't only live once. The consequences are likely to be that next time when you have a loving partner, they're going to have an affair with somebody. How will you feel about that? You need to not just think about the pleasure that you're going to get, that you imagine that you're going to get now. You need to think about the consequences of the kind of karma that you're creating. So it's fair, and it's worthy of compassion, our deluded state. And this kind of, Buddhists have to be very grown up and mature, and we have to take a lot of responsibility, and we have to be very humble. It's not easy to be a good Buddhist. But it is, I believe it's easier than having a theistic religion. Because if you believe in a creator God who's all powerful, and then horrible things are happening in your life, inevitably you're going to have that experience of, God, I love you so much. I have so much faith in you. And yet you keep punishing me. Why are you doing this? Well, that's a very painful mind state. And I would rather have the worldview that we have. It's okay, I made some mistakes in the past. I'm experiencing some challenges, but I am capable of laying new conditions, new influences right now, which are going to improve my situation in the future. That gives me tremendous opportunity to take responsibility, to grow up, to be disciplined, and to create a wonderful destiny in the future, regardless of what God thinks or does. And in Buddhism, there are deities, but we don't believe that they have complete power over everything. Karma is the most powerful force in the universe. Then we diligently lay wholesome karmas once we understand what they are, and stop making bad karmas once we know what they are. So.
Question 3. Dear Ajahn, what is Buddhism's stance on IVF or surrogacy? How does karma lead one to be conceived through in vitro fertilization? Do beings somehow choose their mothers and fathers? How is it possible for a Tibetan Lama, for example, to choose to be born in a certain place? Example, certain village in Tibet. How can their consciousness influence karma with deep gratitude?
So for most beings, there probably isn't much choice with regard to rebirth. There's the power of karma. That's the phrase in the Suttas when people wonder about it. It's like consciousness is the bridge between births, and karma is the fuel. So karma is pushing the consciousness into its next birth. And for most people, whatever level the mind has been at as a kind of an average, wherever your mind state has been hanging out as an average over a lifetime, that's the train tracks, that's the train that's going to that destination, kind of careering along on those tracks, on that vibration. It's likely to go to a similar state. So if you've been mostly a human being, a few heavenly mind states, a few hellish mind states, but mostly a good person, likely to have a human birth. If you've been very diligent in your keeping your precepts, doing your chanting, meditating daily, then you will have had periods each day when your mind was deva-like, and you've increased your chances of being born in the heaven realm. If you get short-tempered and make excuses to break the precepts every day and lose your temper and hold grudges and mull over old wounds and gossip about people all the time, then you might have a difficult time getting born as a human. So we have to be mindful of what we're doing and the consequences. But for people who begin to become adept at meditation, they develop more powerful minds. And this parami that we call adhitthana parami, the capacity to make determinations, to be determined, but also to make determinations, then the great practitioners are able to look into the future, and they're able to see suitable locations. And then through the power of their determination, they come out of their meditation and they determine, at the time of death, I will be reborn in that family, in that area. And they do have the power to, somebody like the Dalai Lama, Panchen Lama, Karmapas, they do have the power to direct the consciousness into the next birth. But these are very advanced and developed practitioners. So for most people, what probably happens is consciousness is leaving the body and you have human realm karma. You need to find a suitable situation within a few days. It's like, because it's like if you miss your chance for your human birth, people tend to get stuck in a kind of what they call an in-between state, kind of like a sambhavesi it's called, and that's not desirable. So there's probably a kind of like, just like in life, right? You're rushing off to the airport or you're rushing off to the train station and you're looking for a ticket. You need to get to a certain destination and you do a search and you need a ticket. Okay, that ticket's available. I'll take that ticket. And there's going to be some karmic connections. If you're going into the womb of a person, there has to be some karmic connection, obviously. But it will be a matter of what choices are available at that time for most people. But if we meditate a lot and dedicate our merits a lot, then obviously heaven realms begin to start to be possible. For myself, I do aspire to a Tushita heaven rebirth next life. And that's good because you don't need a womb available. You just need a blossoming lotus. So. And apparently if you make merit and you determine to be born in Tushita, your lotus blossoms at that time. So, and when you make bad karma and you don't take care of your virtue, your lotus begins to wilt up there in heaven, shrivel. And the devas who take care of lotuses are kind of like, oh, I do not know, not taking care of his mind. So, then you go to India, practice a lot, lotus gets fluffier and more fragrant. Come back to the building project, shrivels again. So yes, But you know, in vitro fertilization, I think in this day and age, there is more challenges with fertility. More people have more difficulty getting pregnant. So if a person is seeking a rebirth and, you know, it becomes possible that it's in a test tube, that the sperm and the egg are blended, and that person has human realm karma, yeah, they're going to jump into that sperm and egg, and obviously with a karmic connection with the mum. So yeah, it's like I said, whatever possibilities are available to you, you will take them rather than being caught in a ghost-like state. If you have the merit to be born as a human, you'll take that opportunity. So, yeah. But apparently that's what's needed, is the sperm and the egg do need to be joining, and the consciousness can absorb at that time. But there's also supposed to be a moment of attraction to the person. So if you're going to be born as a woman, apparently you're going to be attracted to the dad. If you're going to be born as a man, apparently you've been attracted to the mother. There needs to be that craving for consciousness to enter the... So maybe it's the state that you're kind of hanging around the sperm and the egg, and in the moment of in vitro fertilization, you have to be attracted to the woman. At least that's how it's described in the Suttas. So. My mother was an attractive woman. She was.
Definitely.
My mother, in fact, my mother was the first woman to be seen to be modeling a bikini on a magazine in Australia. Isn't that outrageous? Anyway, and we don't have a copy of the picture, unfortunately. My mother was the first woman to wear a bikini on Vogue magazine in Australia. There you go. I don't know if that was good karma or not. What say you?
Question for Dear Ajahn. My rabbit was sick with fly strike, infected ears and paws, but I never cleaned or hold her, though I brought her to see a vet. After 76 days, she died. One night, I dreamt she levitated with a smirk smile on her face, but she wasn't looking at me. Can Ajahn interpret my dream for me? Thank you.
I would interpret levitating as the meaning moving upwards. I would interpret smirking as being happy. I would interpret not looking at you meaning I'm moving onwards, not looking back. I don't think you need to worry about your rabbit.
Question 5. Dear Ajahn, I've heard different Ajahns in the Theravada tradition mention that if you stop eating and drinking with the aim of dying, for example, due to a terminal illness, or if you give the order to be disconnected from a life support machine, this wouldn't create bad karma for you as you are not shortening your life. I don't understand how this can be different in essence from, for example, drinking poison to die, other than the time it would take for your vital organs to stop working. Could you please share if there are any Buddha's teachings with regard to stop eating or drinking to die in terms of one's own karma? Or if someone decided to end their life peacefully, like for example, through a painless device, are there any sutta to support the idea that such an action in itself may have a negative impact on the person's own karma for next life? Thanks in advance for any insight about this.
Yeah. So we live in an age where there is a lot of medical care in many of the countries where we live. So a lot of people have serious illnesses which are treated, and then they end up living longer and longer. And then also in some countries, euthanasia is now legal under certain circumstances. So these questions do come up, especially for people who are middle-aged and who may have parents who are approaching their death, or friends and grandparents, uncles and aunties. So it's a subject that comes up again and again. The way I understand it is, if the body was going to die, if left to its own devices, if you were left to your own devices, if you're no longer capable of picking up the spoon and putting food in your mouth, you're no longer capable of chewing, then if left to nature, that body is going to die. So it gets complicated when you get taken to the hospital and somebody drills a hole in your, or sticks a tube up your nose and is putting liquefied food into your body. I would say that that is an unnatural extension of life, myself. Now, some people want that. That maybe some people would consider that to be bad karma. Some people would consider that to be good karma. I know of examples of people, some people who were scared of death, who weren't ready to die. And so they wanted that. They wanted to be in a nice hospital. They wanted people fussing over them. They wanted the tubes. And then at a certain point, they're kind of like, yeah, no, it is time to go. And they didn't pull out the tubes, but other things happened because they couldn't exercise and stuff. Certain infections take over, and at a certain point, the body died anyway. So I have seen a couple of examples where extending the life, I would say unnaturally, was helpful and appropriate because the person wasn't ready to go. And that painful, drawn-out experience helped them in their process of being willing to let go. So for that person, fine. But for myself, if I have a choice, if I can no longer, if there's an injury and the mind seems to be in a coma for a period of time and it looks like it might be able to come out of that within a couple of days, okay, life support, and let's see. But if I personally have some kind of a degenerative disease, one of those autoimmune diseases that degenerate muscle tissues or whatever, if I had that, if I can no longer chew my food, I don't want a tube up my nose. For me, that's when my body is saying, this is it for this life. So that's my standard. I can no longer feed myself. Please let the body die. I've got better places to go, better situations to be next. So not prolonging the life through what's the word? Not prolonging the life through interventions is different to taking poison. It is. Because if you don't prolong, if you just decide, okay, my karma for this lifetime is up, I can no longer chew or swallow or walk, it's time to die. And that's how I would see it, if I had that experience. But if there's a poison that you're taking to kill the body, that is a different step. Now, is that appropriate sometimes? Well, that's an individual choice. I mean, if a person has a very, very painful type of cancer that's going to go into the bones, and even the painkillers can't take away the pain in the bone, and you know, if a person is confronted with that choice, as a bhikkhu, I could never say it's okay, but I can say it's your choice. And when confronted with that choice, we have to make sure we're coming from a space of goodwill. So if your intention is loving kindness towards yourself and those around you, then that one would have to be very determined to maintain that mind state. I just say that much. And we have to be very determined to maintain a coming from a caring space. Keep doing that. Because the two things that are most important for the next life is the general level that the mind's been throughout this life as an average, and the last thought moments. So if you really, really can't stand it anymore and you take a poison from an irritated, aversive state, that's going to have consequences. At the same time, if there's a painful, debilitating disease and there's this really lot of pain and the mind gets heavy with dejection and despair, that is also going to have consequences. So one of the wonderful benefits of meditating, and meditating a lot, is that we do get practice of bearing with painful feelings, bearing with painful mind states, and we get practice at brightening the mind when it gets in heavy states. This is what we all need to do as the best the best preparation for our passing, is we need to become skilled at, when the mind's becoming heavy and negative, we develop an ability to brighten it. How do you do that? You know, if I was stuck on some kind of ventilator and I had some kind of infection and I knew that I probably had a couple of days, I would be thinking about my trips to Bodh having built a jetty, dedicated merits to ghosts, pilgrimages, having taught people. You know, I would be trying to think of the good things I did this lifetime. And I would just keep doing that. And I think of the Buddha's enlightenment. I think of the Bodhi tree. I think of the Buddha. I think of my teachers. Think of the skillful things that I did. Think of all of the people that I'm grateful to who helped me this lifetime. And I would just, despite the fact that the body was sick and the mind was a bit dejected, I would be thinking of things that I felt grateful for, and thinking of things that, wholesome things I'd done that I was happy that I did. That's what I tried to do as I was dying. And we need to develop some adeptness at doing that. And it's something that doesn't come naturally. Like if the mind falls to a depressed or dejected or just kind of bearing with it, kind of begrudgingly state, it's not going to incline naturally. It's going to then incline, naturally it will incline to having negative thoughts and resentment, or why me, shouldn't be like this, why aren't my children visiting me, or why didn't the doctor treat me with better medicine, why, and we should have. That's not good. That's going to be the ghost that's hanging around the kids, haunting them, you know. And you should have treated me better. And we don't want to do that. We want to be thinking, okay, this is painful, this is crappy, but there were wonderful experiences I had this life, there were wonderful opportunities that I had, and I'm going to focus on what I learned, what I'm grateful for, what I'm happy for, despite the pain and the challenges. So we need to do some preparation for that.
Question 6, dear Ajahn, what about having to make a decision whether to switch off life support or to take our feeding tubes? Is that killing too?
Yeah, so I think I covered that question. It's I would see it as allowing the body to take its natural course. If that's how I would see it. Suppose the person's been in that state for a considerable amount of time, and it becomes obvious that they're not going to get better, then the tubes and the respirators and all of those things are prolonging a life unnaturally, actually, through intervention. And you know, I recommend to people that they write what they call a living will, because if you've given the instructions in your own living will, I don't want my life, I don't want interventions at the end of my life. If I can no longer breathe without help or eat without help, I don't want interventions. Allow the body to die. If one has said that in one's will, then it's not the kids that have to turn the respirator off. It's your instructions, and they're honoring your instruction. So, you know, I think that's a responsible thing to do. And I've told the people who are around me that should I get in that state, please call Ajahn if he's still alive, and then don't don't put in the tubes and don't put in the respirator.
Question 7. Dear Ajahn, can someone who is suffering intensely take some consolation in the fact that one is at least exhausting his or her negative karma? Do we actually pay off our karmic debts if one has severe physical illness and facing vicious circumstances? Thank you, Ajahn.
I do think that is a skillful way to see it. If you are facing a painful illness that there's no avoiding, then yes, being glad that that heavy karma will be at least out of the way. I think that is skillful. And with regards, like we do have to accept the fact that if we're experiencing a lot of pain and serious illness, we did cause harm to other beings. But it's very important to understand that that is the case for everybody. So one doesn't have to feel especially bad or particularly guilty or take it personally. Obviously, it's very hard not to take it personally because there is a conventional self that is suffering. But what I'm trying to say is the appropriate response is compassion. It's like, it is worthy of compassion that we've all made bad karmas in the past, which ripen as these painful circumstances. That is worthy of compassion. So one looks at one's situation with care, not with judgment. And yes, the fact that this heavy karma will be resolved is a good thing. And hopefully the more positive karmas ripen soon after. And I know that's how the Tibetans would tend to see it. It's being grateful that you were able to resolve a heavy karma. And then the challenge becomes, how does one keep the mind somewhat wholesome, or at least restrain it from becoming very negative when there's a lot of pain? And that's hard. I think one of the things that we can do is bring to mind, we can ask ourselves a question when we're in that state: how many other people in the world are experiencing a state similar to this right now? This is a very helpful way of kind of diffusing it and making it less personal. And it's like, I'm so miserable. This is such a hard situation. But when you ask yourself, how many other people in the world are experiencing something very similar to this right now? It's probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. And as painful a reflection as that is, what that can lead to in terms of like just acknowledging the extent of suffering in the world. But what it can lead to is that if you can then have compassion for yourself and all of those people, then you get a very expanded heart, which is humble in the face of the extent of the suffering in the world, really wishes that it didn't have to be like this. And if you can, breathing in, may I be free from suffering, may I eventually get through this, and breathing out, may all of the people in the world experiencing this now be free from suffering and get through this. Then it can be a very consciousness expanding, and compassion is one of the Brahma Viharas. It's a very wholesome divine mind state. So if, you know, that's probably the attitude I would take to having a very painful, debilitating illness, is I would try to use that for developing compassion for myself and all other beings experiencing something similar. And yes, all karmas arise, stay for some time and cease. And there are wholesome karmas, neutral karmas, and unwholesome karmas. So hopefully the wholesome ones ripen after the difficult ones. I just wanted to say, it is also the case that if a person's spiritual faculties are right, people often learn the most during difficult periods. So a difficult period, we have to be careful with our interpretation. So I know, but it does require that the spiritual faculties are at a certain level that we can really reflect on the nature of life and develop a different level of spiritual urgency and insight. And Ajahn said that he developed most insight practicing with malaria 5 or 6 times at Wat Map Ajahn, where he established a monastery. So, you know, the fevers, the cold sweats, the pains, the nausea, all of that. When a person has enough mindfulness to notice the arising and ceasing and changing, hot, cold, nausea, sleepiness, it's a very ripe situation. So he developed. When I look back on the first 4 years of building this monastery, I knew it was going to be difficult. And it was, like I said it before, about 10 times more difficult than I thought. And if you were to ask me, would I do it again? I would say no. But if you ask me, do I regret doing it? I would also say no. When I look back at how much stronger I became by wanting to leave but not leaving, by feeling like I couldn't do it but doing it anyway. You know, really difficult periods can help us develop qualities and patience and wisdom and all sorts of things. And, you know, I like that I became a stronger person with more abilities and more patience. So I don't regret that part. Grateful. And so, yes, we can learn and we can develop from difficult periods. And I think that's the best attitude to take, isn't it? Confronted with challenges, how do we learn from them? What can be cultivated? It's a question I asked myself. What can be cultivated? There was a particularly difficult time where I was mindful that the hundreds of people who had supported me to be here were quite happy that I was building a monastery here. And I was very miserable. And I was mindful that, okay, there's one person who's miserable and hundreds of people who are happy. So if I remove myself from the situation, I'll be less miserable. But these hundreds of people will be unhappy. And so then it just became, okay, so I'm making a minimum 3-year commitment. And if I'm miserable for that time, hundreds of other people are happy, it's worth it. Fortunately, after 3 years, I wasn't miserable anymore. Sorry. Okay. So good to see you all again. Until next time. Take care.
Thank you so much, Ajahn. Rest well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Rest well, Ajahn. See you soon, yeah?
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce and JC. Bye.
Bye. Bye.